What the hell is going on here? Well, that didn't work out too damn good right there with that intro. I don't know what the hell Mike did with that one. But everybody, welcome to the show. We got Hollywood and Mike. We got the peg leg here. And we got a very special guest with us, and that is Mooch, baby. He has a new book out, and he's going to be telling us all about that. If you don't know who Mooch is, you've probably seen him on YouTube, Instagram. He is making the rounds right now. But let me bring Mike in here. I got to like scold him about the intro, man.
You know, you blame me for you misclicking. You know what? For your mistake here, I'm going to fix it. Here we go.
Okay, man, you got it right now. You got to, you know what? You don't make me feel so bad that you screwed up.
Oh, okay.
What the hell was that one anyway, man?
I don't know. You clicked the other one that totally is not even in the realm of the area, but that's okay. It's okay.
It happens. You're on WMMRDB right now. Well, you got the Hollywood and Mike show again. We're going to be having a special guest today. It's going to be cool. Hearing from him. He's been on the show on Insane Throttle, but he is now on this one on a couple different channels. We got him finally live on the radio. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one. He is a really intelligent guy that has really led a awesome type of life. What do you think about that, Mike? He's really done a lot of stuff.
He's done probably like what I would say is doing it all. You know what I mean? You start from, you know, really the bottom and you learn kind of like almost like these different subcultures along the way. And I'm kind of very much a similar person. So that's what kind of like what me and Mooch definitely connect on is I love watching the subcultures and what he's gone through. Granted, I have not read his brand new book or anything like that, and I can't wait to. But I do know that he talks about from, you know, the gang life to motorcycle club life to social life, you know, meaning social work life. So it's really incredible to see what, you know, people's stories are. And he's definitely got one.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, you've been getting a lot of good ones on for the Sunday show as far as personal stories, personal types of achievements. And he's really achieved a lot, man, within the club scene, within his personal life. He's all into that karate stuff or ninjutsu.
Jiu-jitsu. That man right there. Last thing I want to do is fight the dude, okay? Forget about it. You know what I mean? The only chance I got is I got my leg. I can swing and try to kick him, but he most definitely is going to grab me, put me in an arm bar with probably my own leg somehow. You know, it would totally suck.
You know, with them jiu-jitsu guys, you just like, it's a Mike Tyson. Somebody paid me $1 million to fight him. I just bring a 12 gauge. It's easier that way to do that. But writing a book is a big accomplishment. It is hard as hell to just sit at a computer and try to write it, or it's hard to convey a story to somebody to ghost write it for you. So that's a huge accomplishment for a lot of people. And I can bet that Mooch never would think he would have got to that point where he was actually able to tell a story and get an audience to read about it, because you know, books are a tricky business, and he was able to achieve that, and you got to give him props for that.
Absolutely. You know, it's when you're writing a book, not that I have either, but that I do know from the friends that have, including yourself, that write, you know, books. It's not easy. It's not like you just have this template that's super easy to just go off of. You've got to sit there and try to, you know, your own mind, you have to put it onto paper somehow and convey a very good story that people are going to stay in tune with. that's going to be hard to do. So it's kind of like you just have this blank slate.
Yeah, it's a blank. Yeah, it is a blank slate for him to write a book. But you know what? I'm really interested in his lift, train, ride. It's kind of a movement right now, and it's something that we haven't seen in the scene before. So it's actually kind of like, wow, man, somebody came up with something that hasn't been done before. You know, you got a lot of people that do vet stuff, do this kind of charity stuff, but this is actually something that really helps the mind and body. That's something that hasn't ever been done.
Yeah, doing something like that is I can only see as a major beneficial for everybody, you know. And I'd love for Mooch to come on in and talk about it.
Go for it. Bring them in, man.
Let's do it. We got the man, the myth, the legend.
Mooch. Got Mooch on, man.
Thanks for all the kind word, guys. Appreciate it.
No problem, man. We're gonna dig deep into who Mooch is right now. And again, his book, let's put it up in the chat room right now. Let's get it out there. It's available on Amazon, and I'm guessing all your major online retailers as well.
Yes, sir.
I actually seen that big ass smile you had on Instagram, man, when you put up a billboard and stuff. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the local businesses sponsored a billboard, so I had a billboard up in town, and that was a pretty surreal feeling, pretty dang cool. So yeah, it was really awesome.
That's pretty cool, man. Being on a billboard. Did you ever think you'd be on a billboard, dude? Like
maybe the most wanted or something.
Maybe on the FBI's most wanted or something for sure.
But no, not in a positive light. It was like I said, it was a real surreal moment. It's really cool.
Well, let's start out let's learn who Mooch is. Let's start out, say at the beginning of your book, not giving away all the details and stuff, but your journey to where you are now. Let's start out with that.
Yeah, so I kind of start out like where any life story does, talking about my family and my upbringing, and I think one of the things that's a little different for me than some of these other books you may read is that I actually had a really good middle class family. We're tight knit Italian family. Most of my family members are teachers and athletic coaches, so I didn't have that like broken home aspect that a lot of people think of when they think of younger kids getting into gangs and stuff like that. I grew up with an identical twin brother. It was also, we played every sport imaginable, but really got into wrestling, and we ended up going to different high schools, so that my mom was hoping we had like kind of established our own identities, which clearly didn't work out if anyone knows my story. But yeah, I had a really good upbringing, man. And I got into the punk rock music scene, and that's kind of what got me into like the anti-racist skinhead gangs and stuff like that. But I kind of I chose my own path, and maybe it wasn't always the best choices, but I definitely wasn't like forced. I wasn't in that struggle that a lot of people have,
Well, let's talk about the punk rock scene. A lot of people, especially in our scene, don't know what the punk rock scene is. Why don't you give them a little bit of a taste?
Yeah, so I used to stay with my aunt during the summertime, and she's kind of an old hippie, but she was really into music, and she used to wake me up to like the Clash and the Ramones, some Madness, and so I really got into those bands early on before a lot of people knew what that stuff was. I was in probably 6th grade. And I think 7th or 8th grade, that band Rancid came out, and I was obsessed because they sounded like the Clash. And I just kind of started going down that rabbit hole. And thankfully, the area I grew up in, Portland, had a lot of great bands, Poison Idea, Defiance. So, I was really immersed in that culture, and I just started going to punk rock shows and all ages concerts and, showing up and meeting people. And so that just really sucked me in early on.
Is it a tight-knit community within the punk rock scene?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure city by city is a little different, but as far as like street punk goes and stuff like that, everyone pretty much knows each other. Back then, this was pre-internet, right? So you have to know somebody to put on a show, and it's usually at somebody else's house, and then we'd all hand make flyers and put them up together. So it was a real community vibe. Absolutely.
Man, that sounds pretty cool, right?
It was pretty badass. I'm definitely happy I was able to experience it, especially, my band ended up touring. So there was 5 of us living in a van, traveling the country, 18, 19, 20 years old, just a bunch of kids driving around, playing concerts every night, partying every night. It was pretty badass.
So you were in a band then, you just said?
Yeah. In 2000, I started a band called The Escaped. And we put out 3 different records on some just mid-sized record labels. But we played like CBGB's in New York. We played Gilman Street in Oakland. We did some Warped tours. We played the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Warped tour one year. So we got to do a lot of really cool stuff, and like I said, that it's kind of crazy looking back on, because this was pre-internet, so you can't just upload a song. If you want people to hear your music, you got to go play, you got to tour. And so we just toured. We worked really, really hard. And, you know, I'm a bit of a networker, so I did really good at just reaching out to venues and people and bands and seeing what we could do to get on the road. And with some support from friends and family, we were able to do it. And we did it for 5 years.
How was it living in a van?
Well, you know, I wouldn't be able to do it now. But when you're, you know, 19, 20 years old, it wasn't too bad. And essentially the last 3 years we were touring full time. We'd be on the road 2 months, home for a month. So we actually all rented a house together too. Before cost of living in Portland went crazy. So we spent probably too much time with each other. But like I said, we were young kids, you know, no one had wives and kids yet. No one had full-time jobs. So for where we were in our life, it worked out really well.
Do you think that's why bands break up, is because they're with each other all the time?
I think that's why relationships break up, bands break up. Everyone needs to have their own peace and quiet from time to time, some separate time, whether it's your partner or your best friend or, you know, bandmates. And so being, you know, living on the road in, you know, pretty dire conditions, you know, not a lot of money,
and
hungry, tired, and you see the same guy day in, day out, and then you get back to your house and it's the same person. Next thing you know, you're fighting about trash and dishes and everything else.
Well, the guy's eating the Funyuns the same exact way every single night, and it just kills me watching that freaking guy eat those freaking, you know, I know, trust me, when you're in tight quarters and you're traveling, man, and then you just around too many people like that.
You take a week off and get back together, and it's like nothing ever happened, and that's your best bud, and you're ready to do it. So that I think that downtime is always important.
But you got like 4 or 5 different personalities at a time. You've got, you know, 4 or 5 different, you know, outlooks on whether it be politics, it could be anything. And so, yeah, that's usually why bands you break up and stuff. There's usually a lot of that.
So you're touring the country and stuff with the same people. How was the parties? Come on,
back then I was clean and sober, but I still would be at all the parties, and they were awesome, as you can imagine. So normally, you know, they're smaller venues, punk rock shows. So a lot of times they couldn't afford hotel rooms, but they would find you a place to stay. So usually it'd be with one of the other bands or the local party house. So, you know, pretty cramped quarters in the basement or on the couch, but in the meantime, it's where everyone went after the show. So, you know, we'd have this big concert, which was pretty much a party. And then we go to someone's house and have this big after party. And that was pretty much nightly.
Well, he's married now, so I ain't gonna bring the other kind of partying up. But Hand of Chaos says, and I wonder if you know any of these, Mooch. Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, Misfits. That's what he thinks of.
Check it out. I got
every single one of them.
I just saw the Misfits, actually. So my wife's not from that scene at all. And so, you know, over the years, I've been kind of introducing her to it. And the Misfits just did a reunion show in New Jersey a few months ago with all original members. And her and I went out there to it. And it was awesome.
That's cool.
So are you still into that type of music, or have you moved on to different?
You know, I've kind of always listened to everything, but that's definitely still something I'll listen to, like when I'm working out or just, you know, just to reminisce. I mainly, and even growing up, I'm mainly into more like Motown and soul and like, you know, Northern soul and oldies and stuff like that. But I still listen to quite a bit of hardcore and punk rock for sure.
Rock on, man. So you were in the punk rock scene. Then where did you go?
Yeah. So from that punk rock scene, I got introduced to anti-racist skinheads, which, you know, a lot of people don't know about. You know, I've explained it a few times on some different shows, but essentially it was, you know, the skinhead movement was just like the punk rock movement, where it was guys that were into certain fashion and certain music, or guys and girls. And there was no politics involved. But by the time I was involved in it, it was pretty synonymous with racism, and Portland had a really big white power skinhead scene. So it was a bunch of guys banding together to keep the neo-Nazis out of our scene, keep them away from our concerts. And so, you know, it was a pretty violent lifestyle. And we pretty much ran like a street gang, other than we weren't making financial gain. But other than that, I mean, we were a neighborhood gang that tried to keep our community safe from you know, neo-Nazi skinheads.
Well, let's bring that up, because we brought that up on with Big Bone and stuff.
Yeah, we did.
I'm one of the biggest anti-freaking Hitler. You know what? A lot of people, I come from a different angle because of the war type of deal, where there was 60 million people that died because of that son of a, you know what? And I can't actually understand why people would look to him. And you being into the anti-skinhead stuff, why do you think they would look to a bastard like that?
You know what? I think a lot of it is it's just like, whether it's clubs or gangs or whatever, it's people you grew up around, and people finding somewhere where they feel acknowledged or fit in. So I would love this, or I would like to believe that a lot of these young kids didn't have that ideology or that belief, but because that was where they fit in or they felt respected, they adopted that. That would make more sense to me than some young kid saying that he had all these crazy right-wing beliefs.
Right, that he naturally had that hate or whatever in his heart, and then all of a sudden, no, I think you're right on that. I think for sure they need recognition that they feel like they've been, fit in somewhere.
Absolutely.
Now, you grew up in Portland. How is Portland unique compared to the rest of the United States? Because you did have a lot of good damn bands come out of Portland.
Yeah, man, Portland was really cool because it wasn't quite big enough to be a big city. So we had a real small town vibe. Like I said, everyone knew each other. And back then it was, it was a lot cheaper to live there. So, we had like all these different punk rock houses where a bunch of punks and skinheads lived together. And so the party scene was big. Early on, like I said, there was a lot of white power skinheads there. There's a lot of historic racism in Oregon. But now when you hear Portland, you think of like left-wing hippie Antifa,
Totally.
You know what I mean? So I think they've always kind of been high on the radar when it comes to politics, and it's just a political city in general. But there's also laced in there is so much of that like laid back Northwest hippie, kind of hippie vibe
Just
too.
good. It's just good weed there. That's probably what it is.
Probably. And there's just so much cool stuff to do as far as nature goes, right? There's the mountains are an hour away. The coast is an hour away. There's hikings and rivers. And so there's that whole, like, just kind of that peaceful atmosphere, peaceful vibe for the most part.
Well, you had grunge that started out that way, didn't you?
Yeah, up in Seattle, but I mean the same overlap, right? It's a couple hours away, so for sure. That bar, okay. Satyricon, we used to play at is where Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love met. I guess it was a little before my time, but same bar. Right.
Well, I remember flying into Portland. You guys need a bigger airport, but
for sure,
it is beautiful over there. Because I would go over into Washington and stuff for the kids, but Portland is something unique. I can tell you that, and I can only imagine how it was growing up there, especially with the music scene and stuff. Good stuff out there, man. How was Portland different than, say, where you moved to the Midwest?
Man, when I'm out here in the Midwest, it's a pretty small town. I'd say that the closest is St. Louis, which is about an hour from me, which honestly was pretty similar to Oregon. In fact, that when I grew up in Oregon, I was about an hour south of Portland until I, graduated, moved up to Portland. So I think there's a lot of similarities there where I'm used to like just commute into town, do all the fun in-town stuff, but actually go back to my small little town afterwards and have some rest. But the biggest difference I've noticed, especially with my age, is food, man. The West Coast and Oregon has amazing food. They're known for all their food carts and, all sorts of healthy food and different varieties of food, where Midwest, it's fried and covered in cheese sauce.
Yeah, I was just in Portland not even a year ago, and the food there is insane. Like it's everywhere incredible. You go, it's incredible what you can get there.
Yeah, you still can't get like Chicago, but we'll give them that one. But so we move from the punk rock scene into the anti-skinhead scene. And where did you go? What did you learn from that scene?
Man, I learned a lot because, like I said, it was pretty gang oriented. So I learned a lot about leadership, about brotherhood. The crew I was in, if you made any mistakes or something, if you're from the club life, you'd understand, but it'd be like a fine or whatever. One in the gang world, you get jumped or beat up, or it's 5 minutes out back or whatever. So I learned a lot about what I liked and didn't like. I learned about what type of leadership was helpful versus what wasn't. Even in the band, I was the manager of the band and ran the band. And looking back, my band members would say, we were pretty much a gang. You ran our band like a gang. So I've kind of always had that like militant perspective, strict leadership. But I learned a lot of that in that skinhead world. It taught me a lot, this isn't super positive, but it taught me a lot about violence and how to, carry out violence and get away with different things. And I'm not saying that to sound like it's a positive by any means, but I just learned a lot in that regard. And I learned about who I could trust and who I couldn't. And that was a really big part.
What lessons did you take from that part of your life until now?
Well, I took a lot of it into the motorcycle club world as far as leadership, brotherhood, being there for each other. But one of the biggest takeaways for me was, like I said, if you got in trouble or someone was mad or just power trip, I was never comfortable around my older friends because we're all drinking and stuff. You never knew who was going to want to fight who, and we were all fighting each other all the time. And when I first started to hang out at the motorcycle clubs, the few that I hung around with, had rules where they said there's no two things brothers can't sit down and talk about. Brothers should never put hands on brothers. And that's what really attracted me to those clubs that I came around, because I was from the opposite. And I saw that, I didn't see a lot of positives from friends fighting friends, even though I know the old adage is, well, shake hands and have a beer after, but I saw how much resentment and grudges that people hold. So kind of graduating up and seeing what I liked and didn't like helped me a lot when I got into the motorcycle club world.
You just said graduated up. What got you into motorcycling before the club stuff?
So we rode Vespas in the skinhead scene, right? So we were all on scooters cruising around
Love
town.
that.
They were like got a 1963 Vespa 150 Super. We put like a 180.
How are you going to leave that out of the story, man?
Yeah. There's a funny picture on my social media of me and my twin brother. Everyone thinks it's real funny. But he was already kind of toiling around, and then some of the older guys were getting like cafe bikes and sport bikes. And one of the older guys got on and was riding Harleys, and he kept talking to ride it. And so I on it, rode around the block, and hooked after that.
Well, we got a little technical on Mooch's end right now.
No worries.
The internet coming up. He'll be getting that back. He froze right there. But Vespas, I need a picture of that, Mike.
I do too. He says it's up there, so we got to find it eventually. Yeah.
Are you there, Mooch, or are you still frozen up, man?
I was in rank. I'm good here.
He's 8-bit right now. He sounds like he's from like Super Mario Brothers or something. Yeah, it's all right. Let's see if I pull him out for a sec. Let's see if it there we go. Yep.
There we go. It's back. But go ahead, Mooch.
Yeah, so some of the older guys, are graduating up to like sport bikes, and cafe racers are really big in Portland. The old Hondas and stuff. Yep. And so then one of the older guys got a Harley Heritage and kept talking me into riding it one day, and I took it for a ride around the block, and I don't think I ever got off.
Oh man, what was the motorcycle scene like in Portland? It's totally different than most of the country.
Man, it's looking back, I'm very grateful that I came up in that scene, because it's one of the few places left in the country where there's like only 3 or 4 clubs, and they've all been there since like the 50s and 60s. And by the time I was there, they were all getting along with each other and coexisting. But very old school vibes, very old, there's several other clubs that have been there for a long time. So just learning about old school history was very cool.
I bet, man. I bet.
On the West Coast, especially like that, it's different, like especially on the West Coast, being in a city where it's like only like 3 clubs, that's very rare. Like, how it is in Southern California, you got 350
Absolutely.
clubs in one COC, it's like Jesus compared.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And that's something I didn't notice until I moved to other places, because when you grow up like that, you just think that's how it is,
Right.
Did you think, does the punk rock scene at any way parallel what the bike scene's like?
It definitely does now. There's a ton of overlap, especially from more like the hardcore scene. But some of the older crews, like, FSU was a big old crew back then. A lot of them are now members of the Outlaws, and there were some of the original guys of FSU. Guys from the Northern California hardcore scene went with the Angels. So kind of depending on where you lived, a lot of guys made that progression for sure.
So was it a progression from being an anti-skinhead, as you said, was more like a gang, to learning about what clubs were like for you? How did you go about learning about them?
So I started hanging out with this old school club called the Outsiders, who, have 2 chapters in the Northwest, but have been there forever. They were one of the original Portland clubs. And a lot of those guys, even their original members, were still around in some capacity. So, I talk about it a bit in my book, but, I met one of the younger members and spent some time with him until he would, trusted me enough to bring me around, and he'd bring me and my brother to their clubhouse, and I'd sit around and hear all these old school stories and Portland history and learn a lot about just motorcycle protocol in general. But I got to hear it firsthand from these, old school guys that have been living it for a long time.
That must have been, mind blowing here.
And enticing. You probably, with your
Absolutely.
mindset at that time, especially, you're probably going, man, this is exactly what I want to hear right now. Like,
Absolutely. And there's that kind of stigma, or I guess in a more positive way, just kind of that aura of when you don't know much about motorcycle clubs and then you finally meet one, you know, might as well have met a Hell's Angel or anything else, because to me, this was like the pinnacle, right? Like, man, I'm meeting these outlaw bikers. This is some crazy stuff. And then, you know, to touch base and learn from them firsthand, that went a long way with me for sure.
So was that first ride on that Harley what got you into a Harley? Do you think if they gave you a, you know, a ride on, say, a Suzuki or a Honda, that you would got more into the Honda Suzuki scene?
No, because I did ride some sport bikes before that. And, you know, to date right now, I've had 29 different bikes, and I've ridden, you know, pretty much anything sport bikes. And I like a lot of adventure bikes and sport bikes and off-road bikes, but I've never had the same feeling that I have when I'm on a Harley. You know, that there's nothing, there's other bikes that probably make their, you know, more mechanically sound and make more power. But as far as like having that personality and feeling that fit to that lifestyle, I don't think anything comes close to a Harley.
I agree. I think, you know,
didn't you?
What's that?
You went and got a Dyna, didn't you?
I have the Lowrider ST now, but yeah, I had FXRs and Dynas.
He went all fancy, man. Like when I saw him post up his ST, I was like, man, must be nice. Must be nice.
You know what's funny is we spent years in those early years trying to build a Dyna that style, right?
That looked like just like
fairing.
that.
Yeah, you know, we were buying repop. We were buying trying to find the old FXRT fairings.
Yes,
or those old clamshell
FXR.
bags. And, you know, we went through so much time and money to try and find that stuff that now that one comes out stock like that, I had to get it.
It was mind blowing for a lot of us. We were like, man, do you know how long we've been trying to build bikes like this? And now finally you're making it. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
It's funny to me when I see people bag on the clamshells or that fairing or whatever, just because I know that scene and we knew how hard those were to get and how that was like the holy grail of parts back then, you know?
What have you done to your bike so far?
Just all the little stuff: exhaust, intake, seat, bars. I put that new Baja headlight on there, which is sick because I'm old and I can't see well at night anymore. But just kind of more of the cosmetic type stuff. It's the 117 is a ripper already, and you know, I'll probably do a cam in it at some point, only because one of the other guys did, and I want to make sure I can keep up. But otherwise, you know,
it's always coming down to that. Yep.
Absolutely. And with the amount of miles I try and ride and put on, I don't like messing with motor stuff too much for reliability purposes. So I mainly do more cosmetic type stuff.
Steve brought up Dyna Bro. Are you a Dyna Bro, Mooch?
So yeah, I was pretty into Dynas, like FXRs and Dynas for a long time. And I created a Facebook group called the Dyna Mob, which got really popular there for a while. And now that scene's huge.
See, that's a Dyna Bro right there. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. What's funny is when I joined the Mongols, they were still riding like Heritages and street glides. And so I'd come around, there was a couple other guys, Bouncer and Monster, that had, you know, club style Dynas, and everyone called them angel bikes. And so we were the white guys from Oregon riding these angel bikes. So, you know, we caught a lot of flack. So when I tried to do that Dyna Mob, I was actually trying to get like the other Mongols and other club guys that rode those style bikes kind of connected.
Oh, that's cool.
Rock on, man. That's some good stuff right there. But at 117, did you have it flashed when you got the exhaust changed? That was from Nitro.
Yeah, I did. I've read a lot on both ways about that M8, if you really need to do it or not. But I bought the new programmable Harley tuner. It's a lot like the Van Syn fuel pack. Figured it was better safe than sorry. And that way I can still update and change stuff.
Oh, okay. Fucking A. Let's go further now. You got onto the bikes. You talked to a lot of old school members with the Outsiders. Where did you go from there? What really hooked you?
Well, so, you know, like I said, I was really enamored by that lifestyle. And so when they offered me a chance to start prospecting for the Outsiders, I jumped at it. I'm an impulsive guy, and I'm not making any excuses. Got a great time there. But, you know, I'm a young kid. I was really looking up to it. So I was all in. So I said yes, and I started prospecting. And you know, that was the only club I did prospect for. I'll just put that out there. And I learned a lot from it. I actually liked it because I learned so much from it. But what I also learned, you know, a couple months into it, is I remember sitting in there kind of looking around the clubhouse, and these kind of older guys, they're listening to some classic rock on the radio. And I was talking about my buddy from my band. His nickname was Fishnets. And they were like, we're not calling him that. And it kind of clicked to me that there was the only thing that I had in common with these guys in this room was this patch, you know, motorcycles. But we were from different eras, different generations. And these aren't people that I would probably like call up to go see a movie or barbecue with. And that I brought that with me when I went to other clubs, is like trying to find a group of best friends that I would hang out with or without the patch.
Well, you know what? We got a special treat here that we're going to show. And this comes directly from Mooch's Instagram account. There we go. What is going on?
I think we're getting ready to race big wheels right there.
That's what's up.
Is that your twin?
Yep.
Again, OG Mooch's Instagram is OG bottom. What is that?
Underscore
Mooch. And then there's the Vespa.
There it is. It's me and my 150 Super.
Yeah.
Bitch.
Notice I got the tall socks on. I've been down for a while. I had the tall socks back then too.
Hey, sock check.
But you brought up something very interesting just now, and that is not having a lot in common with a different generation of bikers. Do you think that's an issue where at certain point some guys should just say, you know what, I'm old and maybe I should retire out because I have nothing in common with the younger kids?
I think everyone has a place for sure. If it comes to leadership, that might be something that I think they should consider. But I also think it's awesome to have those old school dudes in the clubhouse or at the parties being able to tell, there's a big difference in telling those cool old stories versus saying it still needs to be like this. So finding that, agreeing with the evolution, but still having the historian there to tell you, like, here's how it used to be. Here's what we went through to get here. Because I've always held those dudes in the highest regards because, they're the ones that help pave the way for the rest of us. So I do think having their presence and having them around is awesome. But I also think there's that boundary of, are they calling shots and trying to make things like the old ways, or are they moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
it's got to be an evolution.
One of the reasons why you left the Outsiders?
Well, yeah, and then I had a lot of just personal stuff in my life going on, which I speak about in the book a little bit, and I was just looking for a change. I had left the Skinhead gang, and that was pretty much what I knew in that area. So I really thought I'd have a fresh start starting somewhere else. And I was managing a porn store at the time. I'd managed this porn store for 5 years. I was in a band forever, so I didn't have any marketable skills, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I was offered a job at a gas company in Carson City, Nevada, where my cousin lives. So I figured, I'm going to go down here, learn a trade, and just try and, I was a young kid trying to figure out my path.
How was that move down to Nevada? What did you learn by leaving what you were used to?
Well, I learned a lot about myself because my cousin's female, so I didn't have like male friends down there. I had to make new friends, figure out who's who in the area, what places were cool. But so I learned a lot about just being on my own, like being an identical twin. I'd always had somebody there with me to do stuff, touring the band. I had my band. So this was the first time I really set out on my own. So it was a really good learning experience for me as far as what am I capable of? How hard can I push myself? I tried a couple different careers. And I honestly, for a motorcycle rider, that area is one of the best places to live. You got Lake Tahoe, Virginia City, everything's right there. So for that time of my life, it worked out really well.
So you still were riding at that point?
Yeah, I didn't even have a car for like 10 years. All I had was motorcycles.
Yeah, you were all motorcycle there for a long, long time, right?
Yeah, I think 10 years I went with.
But you never really have stopped riding since then, right? You've
Absolutely.
Been consistent.
I joined a motorcycle club because I love motorcycles, and that's first and foremost what brought me into motorcycle clubs. Obviously, I was in a gang and I've been in a band, so obviously I like to join. I'm not going to deny that part.
Right.
But it was because of my love for motorcycles that brought me into that world.
You brought up something very interesting and something a lot of kids don't know these days. And I think it's one of the most important things that they can learn is you brought up a trade. Most kids are gunned in high school to go to college where the trades are really neglected. How important it is for a kid to learn a trade now?
I think any sort of marketable skill is the most important part, right? Like nowadays, some of those trades might be stuff to do with, internet and programming and stuff that's well above me. But, in Portland, it was a really heavy union town. So it was like everyone I know that was successful were in some sort of labor union or iron workers so they were all in trades. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at that young age. I barely got through high school. So I tried like one day of college and I was like, this isn't for me. Which is funny considering where my path went later. But at the time, I was like, well, school's not for me. I had a felony as soon as I turned 18. And so, I couldn't get into the military. So I was really trying to find my path. And I really thought that learning a trade was going to be the thing that helped me really get into that, into a more consistent lifestyle.
Is that something you recommend as a social worker now?
I think just what I always recommend is looking at your strengths. What are you good at? What would you like to do? Something that you can do day in and day out and feel satisfaction when you get home, or especially for those of us that have been burnt out, things that where you can turn it off when you leave. So I think there's different paths for different people. And I think really focusing on your strengths is what's going to be the important part. Some people are great academically. They're going to go to school and succeed and do a great job. And others, can learn a trade or a skill somewhere else and be marketable there. So I think it really depends on the person.
Yeah, that's exactly the route I took. I took the trade route right out of school. I mean, like basically from graduation, I was working out at sea on a trade, and that was what I had done all the way up until my leg got severed. So unfortunately can't go back to that. But nonetheless, the trade was definitely the route I went, because I was, like you had just said, I kind of barely got through high school. And it wasn't because I didn't want to, it was just because I really didn't care about what they were trying to teach me. Aside from
Absolutely.
like math, like the stuff that I knew, like history, I hated when they tried to teach me history. It's Americanized anyways. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to learn like math, and then I was teaching guitar as like a guitar class for an actual like English class and an actual history class, and so that's me getting barely through, school myself.
Yeah, and mine was really similar. It wasn't necessarily that I got bad grades when I focused. It was just I didn't see the importance of it. I was so focused on moving to Portland and being in a band and doing this punk rock stuff that I wasn't career oriented or career focused.
Right.
Now, let's move on. You went to Nevada and you were learning about who you were as a person. And it was in Carson City, and that's not Las Vegas, everybody, because everybody, when they hear Nevada, they think Las Vegas. This is Carson City. And you were already in the Outsiders. It sounds like you left them. What was the next step for you in the club life?
So initially they let me leave on what they call the inactive prospect status because I was gone for work. So if I was only going to be gone for a little while, I could come back and pick up where I left off. And they're, those old school clubs have a real tight brotherhood with other old school clubs. So they sent me some references to some other clubs down there that I might be interested to hang out with, make friendships with. So, I wasn't down there long before I was trying to find other people to ride with. But like we were talking about the cultural differences, I go to Nevada and there's like 12 different clubs there, and, the Angels were there, it was Booze Fighters. I mean, Vagos were big there. So I was trying to learn the lay of the land. And I remember I accepted an invitation from the Booze Fighters to ride up to a COC because I figured if I go to the COC, I'll see all the clubs in the area, meet some people, shake some hands, which I did. And I had a good time. And I went up to some of these clubs that the Outsiders had told me to hit up. And they just, I was a young kid, I think 23, 24 years old, that no one seemed interested in hanging out with me. They were just like, oh, cool. Yeah, nice to meet you. And they took off. So the Booze Fighters had invited me to this bar. And this is, like I said, pre-MapQuest type stuff, really, or at least pre-navigation. And they gave me one of those 3 stoplights, take a right, type of directions. And they were waiting for me, but I was waiting to talk to the righteous ones, try and get to know those guys. And so I'm hanging out the COC and everyone had left. And I was like, well, I still want to hang out with somebody. So I'll go find these Booze Fighters. And so I'm going down, 6th Street, the big one there in Reno, where all the biker bars used to be. And every club kind of had their own bar on that street, which I didn't know at the time, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I see a group of green, and I assume it's Booze Fighters. So I pull in, and as I'm pulling in, I have to pass 2 prospects that are standing guard, and there's all barricades. And as soon as I pull in, I realize these aren't Booze Fighters, these are Vagos. But I don't want to just turn around and pull out. So right. I just backed my bike to the curb, took a deep breath, and walked in.
That's a cool way to be introduced like that. Just be thrown right into it yourself.
Well, and because I wasn't wearing a patch or anything back then, I would wear a sleeveless denim over a leather jacket. It was kind of that hipster look. So here I am. And the first thing I thought of is these guys are going to think I'm trying to look like them, because there was no Vagos in the part of Oregon I was in. They were down in Southern Oregon. So I'd never really seen Vagos before. And the first thing I saw was, they wear denim. I'm wearing denim. I just walked into their bar, so, but it ended up working out really well. And I met quite a few of them and made a lot of connections. And what really struck me is, so their chapter president, Awful Al, had come up to me, and man, I wasn't drinking at the time, but I wasn't sure if I was going to get jumped. Right. So I bought a bottle of beer and went and sat in the corner. And he came up and started shooting the breeze with me. And I was telling him how I just moved here for this new job. And he started calling and checking on me pretty often. Like my very first day of work, I had a voice mail from Al saying, "Hey, how was work? How did it go?" And so when I'm in an area where I didn't know many people and it was just me and a family member, that went a long way with me. So I started going up and spending evenings with Al, having dinner with him and his family, and eventually started riding around with those guys. And I ended up joining the Vagos. Al started his own chapter. He was branching off from Reno and starting a chapter called Border Town. And he asked me if I'd be interested in joining. So, and one of the big differences too, which I think I talk about in my book a little bit too, is, Oregon, like I said, it's a very old school motorcycle scene. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but it's just a different culture, where the Vagos and stuff I met in Reno were closer to my age. There was some guys from like the skateboard and punk rock scene. Mike, you'll know Bobby Adams from 7 Seconds. I'm actually the one that sponsored him to join the Vagos, but he used to kick it.
That's funny.
So there was this overlap of like punk rock dudes, especially in Southern California. There was more people like me in that club, so I felt more connected and resonated with it more.
We'll get to that one. China Dow about Mooch was in a movie, and we'll talk about that. But how important was, because a lot of people don't understand this one, is hanging around with somebody, getting to know them and not just jumping in.
Absolutely the most important part. And the more years I spent in the club world, the more I would try and impress that upon the hangarounds. Everyone's excited. And so when you're that excited and your mind's made up, you're like, let me join. I'm ready to prospect. But I've seen so many people do that because, you're enamored and you're only focusing on the good, and you're missing the things that might not be a good fit for you. All of the stuff that comes with it on both sides of the coin, you don't really get to see unless you're hanging out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And
hang around for a little bit longer than just a couple of days. Hang a little longer than just a couple of weeks.
You really want to get to know everybody and say, okay, is this people? Like I said, are the way I would always tell you guys is, are these people I would hang out with if it wasn't for this patch? Were these people that I would go to their families, for dinner and stuff like that? Are these people that I would gel with? And I was too young and naive to know that back then, but that definitely throughout the years is something that really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
So did you ended up joining the Vagos? Yes.
Correct. Yeah, I was a Vago for just short of 2 years.
And how was that experience?
Man, it was cool. So coming from this old school mentality and these old school Oregon ways, when I first started hanging out with the Outsiders, they had one guy that had a night train, and they called him Store-Bought Scott because they all had custom bikes. There was baggers weren't a thing. You couldn't even, they didn't even really want you to have a stock bike back then. And in Reno, there was a lot of, the bagger scene was starting to get a little bit bigger, but still wasn't huge. But, I just started learning a lot more, like culturally, about the motorcycle scene as a whole outside of Oregon. As a Vago, I was riding to LA and Northern California. And, me and my brother, he ended up joining the same time I did. He ended up moving right after I joined, and then joined with me, or right before I joined. And so we were those guys, we're young kids trying to make a name for ourselves. So we went to every event we could, and we rode to everything. So we were racking up miles, spending time on the road with different guys and checking out, Los Angeles and Vegas and Sacramento. And so I just learned a lot by experience.
What was it like having your twin brother with you in the club?
It's cool, man. It's really cool because you always have someone there you can depend on no matter what, This was way before club politics or anything got involved in my life, but even just sketchy situations, breakdowns, lost or whatever, I always had someone I could depend on next to me. So that was a huge benefit for my whole life, no matter what it was I was doing.
Was it ever kind of a conflict when you had your brother with you? Like, would they be like, oh, you're playing favoritism or any of that kind of shit? Would you ever get any of that?
No, not really. I mean, maybe someone else might say that from their perspective, but I never saw it from my perspective.
Right. No. So it wasn't prominent.
I was always harder on him than anybody else. So everyone's probably happy they weren't my brother.
Right.
What were you riding during the Vagos?
I had a 06 night train and bought it in 05. So it was like, they came out a little year earlier. And I remember because they gave me the option of fuel injected or carbureted, and fuel injection other than that old Delphi system wasn't popular yet. And so I was like, I don't want that. I want the carbureted. So it was the first year the night train put that 200 back tire on there. And actually, funny story about that is they didn't, only the motor was black. And me and an outsider, Spike, rest in peace, he helped me strip the bike apart, and then we sent it somewhere to get powder coated, and I powder coated it, tip to tip, all matte black. And no one else was really doing that. The Gypsy Jokers had a lot of black bikes. Remember the outsider saying, oh, it looks like a Joker bike. But, now you can go in and buy it just like that. But at the time, I was one guy with like an all blacked out bike. Like it was when I pulled into Reno, I got pulled over by the cops because they wanted to know why it was all black and what parts were stolen. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
It's funny how quick culture shift, you know, because that wasn't a thing yet.
What did you said as far as cops pulling you over, what did you learn about motorcycle profiling while you were in the Vagos?
Yeah, Mike and I were talking about this earlier too, just how different it is on the West Coast versus Midwest or other places. But I didn't realize that till many years later, right after I moved. Coming up in like kind of gang life, we were always pretty anti-authority, anti-cops. So honestly, it wasn't a big shift for me because because of the way we dressed and we're all heavily tattooed and stuff. We got treated a certain way by law enforcement even before club life. I definitely saw it firsthand, but it was something I was already expecting.
What do you say to the naysayers within the scene that say it doesn't happen?
Police profiling?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely happens. And I mean, I guess it depends on where you live, but if you live on the West Coast, there's no way you can tell me it doesn't happen or that you haven't seen it, because I couldn't tell you, when I was wearing a patch, if I've ever even been pulled over by one cop. It's usually at least several. They're scared half the time. They're scared for their lives, or they're being dicks, and they don't, I'm a respectful and polite person, but it doesn't matter.
They've got their hands on their pistols, everything's ready.
Absolutely.
No, I was telling Mooch behind the scenes that I was not that long ago, of course, because I had a patch on, I got ticketed, literally ticketed for doing 3 miles per hour over. Not like, hey, warning, like don't do that again because I just want to harass you kind of thing. No, this cop actually ticketed me for 3 over. Couldn't believe it.
Now, one thing that a lot of people don't understand when you get in that club, and we're still talking about the Vagos here, is relationships. How did it back then? Because you said you were younger. How did it affect relationships that you had?
I think one of the benefits was that I just moved to this new area. So a lot of the people I was starting to meet were in that club life or were Vagos. It would have been probably a lot different had I done it in Portland at that time and would, spend less time with my old friends, more time with new friends, or was in a serious relationship. So kind of the timing of my life worked out pretty well. But again, that's something that I didn't reflect on until many years later. I often tell newer guys coming around, that are already married, it's one thing to be a single guy and join a club and then meet a woman, she's cool with everything, and get married, versus you're already set in your relationship ways and now you're going to change everything to be in a club.
Right. That's the super hard thing that we've actually spoke about on the show before. It's one thing when, you meet her and you're already involved, she already knows what she's signing up for. It's a little different when all of a sudden you've been in a relationship, let's say 5-10 years, and all of a sudden dude's like, oh yeah, I'm going to join a motorcycle club.
And they're used to you your Friday night dinners or Saturday family or whatever. They're used to you being home often. And, everyone knows once you're in the club life, you're not home that often.
So was it hard to keep a relationship with a girl going?
I was single I went through a pretty bad breakup right around the time I was joining the Vagos, and I stayed single for several years. So, I guess I would say yes, because I wasn't in a serious relationship up until I'd been in the Mongols for quite a few years. I would just, I'd find girls to hang with, or we go to parties with and stuff. But I definitely, I was that young kid that was trying to prove myself, and my whole focus was on club life. So yeah, I definitely wasn't putting a big focus on relationships.
By the way, we are now talking to Mooch, and he has a new book out over on Amazon and all the major I was going to say podcast, but major online bookstores. It's Ride of My Life, Street Motorcycle. Is that right, Mooch?
Yeah.
The ride of my life, from street gangs to motorcycle clubs to social worker.
There you go, right there. So it is on Amazon, and it is in the chat room right now. All you have to do is click it, and you would be able to get that book right there. Make sure you guys support them if you would. Again, just click on it. And if you're on the radio right now, it's Amazon.com where you can get that title of the book. Moving on from the Vagos, was there a brief break before going to the Mongols?
No, not at all. Actually, I had moved back to Oregon, and so now I was in an Oregon chapter of the Vagos, and I met a lot of Vagos I was really getting along with, and it was back to that more Oregon mentality. The Oregon Vagos were a little different than the Nevada ones. It was a lot of older guys, that more kind of biker scene, and I had some great friends in it, but same kind of things I'd brought up before, and they were starting to get some politics involved and some things I didn't like about that club lifestyle. And, you know, I say this with all due respect because they're a much different club now under different leadership. But at the time I was in it, we weren't happy with national leadership. And my chapter was having issues with another Vago chapter. And we were sitting down in this meeting discussing where we were going to have to figure stuff out. And I was like, well, man, what did I sign up for here? I'm about to go to war with another chapter. So, I mean, I guess war is not the good word, but you guys know what I mean. And so, you know, we kind of talked about it as a chapter, and someone had brought up, hey man, if I ever joined another club, it would be the Mongols. And I happened to know a Mongol then. And just coincidentally at the same time, this is during Doc's big recruitment drive, which I didn't know anything about back then. Right. But
at the time,
the internet was just getting popular, and the Mongols had a website, and they said, welcome, Oregon Mongols. And so I remember reaching out to the Mongols as a Vago and just saying, hey, you know, I heard that you guys are starting this chapter in Portland, and I just, you know, I'd love to meet the guys, show you guys around, you know, see if we can build a connection. And I'm sure they knew what I was reaching out for. And it wasn't long before I was sitting down with them and we started talking about patching over.
I want to hit China Doll's question real quick. You were in a movie. What was that movie about?
She probably talking about the one for my Instagram where I played a fighter. Is that what she was asking about? Yeah. No, some of the guys from my jiu-jitsu team, one of his brothers does movies, and they were going through film school, and they were looking for guys for an MMA fight scene in the background. So I just showed up and got to fight someone on film. And actually, it's kind of funny because I win the fight on film, but the guy that I'm fighting is actually like a world champion Muay Thai kickboxer, and he would beat the crap out of me in real life.
Oh, shoot.
We did like 20 takes, and I was just checking kicks the whole time. I was all bruised and beat up afterwards. So thankfully, he was a rad dude. But that was really cool. It ended up not getting released because it was more, you know, I think they ended up not having the budget for it or whatever. But I still have the clip of it on my Instagram. It was really cool experience.
Rock on. So you reached out to the Mongols. How did your brothers from the Vagos react to something like that?
Well, so initially I wasn't going to do it unless our whole chapter was going to do it. And we had sat down and our whole chapter said they were on board with it. And I was just kind of, at the time, I was just going to be the go-between. I wasn't in any sort of position of leadership at all. I was just a regular member. But because I had known some Mongols, I was just kind of the go-between. So the Mongols invited me to go out to Biketoberfest in Daytona one year. And I flew out there by myself, which looking back, kind of a crazy move, but I flew out there by myself. The Outlaws were having issues with the Vagos at the time over some expansion into Georgia. And my dumbass is out there wearing a Vago shirt, just kicking it. I'm hanging out with a bunch of Mongols that I don't know from Adam. And, you know, we go out and end up meeting some Outlaws, and we kind of got in a sketchy situation. And it got to a point where the Mongols weren't sure if they were going to get out of there. And they said, hey man, you're a guest. You don't need to be here. And I said, hey, I came here with you guys. I'm staying with you guys. And I think that went a long way. And so shortly thereafter, they said, hey, if this is what you want to do, you know, we'll green light your chapter. So I went back to Oregon and told them, but by the time I got back, things had changed. Some people wanted to come, some didn't. Some guys started thinking, well, if they leave, we can be in leadership. And so it kind of, I'd already given the Mongols my word and I wasn't going to go back on it. So it wasn't a smooth transition, I guess, to answer your question.
Let's see here. We got Douche Canoe. Curious about Mooch's use of the term gang about his pre-MC life. Not a lot of club members like that term, and it's pretty rare to hear skinheads talking about being a gang. Happens, but rare.
You know, the gang culture in the skinhead scene and the hardcore scene is actually really big. You know, there's different crew, or maybe they call it crews back then, but you know, everyone, their own crew had names. There was often jump-ins. We did weekly meetings. We had positions. And so I think I use the word gang just for lack of a better term so that people can understand it. I wouldn't use that term when I talk about motorcycle clubs for, you know, various reasons. But when it came to like, we were pretty much a street gang other than we weren't making any sort of financial income. But that was common back then. I mean, skinhead and hardcore gangs.
I still hear them used as that term. So that's just me. But yeah, he's not referring anything about MCs or anything like that.
What did you find in the Mongols that you didn't find in the Vagos?
So, you know, one of the issues I said was a leadership stuff with Terry the Tramp. And I remember one time at a Vago run, and their national secretary at the time was a dentist, and he had all this really nice jewelry. And he remember him going, "Oh, don't tell Tramp that I have this necklace because he'll want it." And he was so like one of those things where like it felt, I kind of got that Debo vibe, right?
Debo is coming.
I'm not saying it happened, but that was the vibe I got. And when I first met or first party with the Mongols, I saw Doc going around from booth to booth, and people were trying to give him shirts, and he said, "No, what are my brothers paying?" And so, and that went a long way with me. And just the word brotherhood is used huge in motorcycle life and all that. It's, overly used, but the Mongols' sole focus was on brotherhood. It was the most tight knit, well organized group of guys that I'd ever been around. And I knew I found my home. So, I know I'd hopped around a little bit because I know that's the term, right? Club hopper. But when I found my home, I stayed in for almost 15 years. So it just took me to get to that position. And then I found my spot, and those were my guys.
Well, Mooch has talked a lot about the Mongols in other interviews, so we'll let those interviews stand for itself. I'm really interested in how in the hell did you say to yourself, I want to be a social worker?
Yeah. So, I when I was, I had that charge for chasing those cops or whatever. And so I'm on probation. I'm on 5 years felony probation, even though it was a misdemeanor charge, but I'm not allowed to associate with the Mongols. And anytime I got caught, I went back to jail. Well, I was getting caught often. Well, looking back, to speak about in the book too, I had some informants in the chapter. So the cops knew my every move. So every time I violated probation, I was going back to jail for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months at a time. And it's like revolving door, where it got to the point where, I had to really take an assessment of my life and said, what do I want to do with myself? And here I am, I got head and neck tattoos. I'm a felon. I was trying to figure out, what's a career I can get into. I always wanted to be a teacher since my family were all teachers. And I knew with the criminal record that was kind of off the table. And there's a Mongol by the name of Richie Rich, who's a PhD in clinical psychology, very well-spoken, put together dude, but has more tattoos than me, kind of looks like a pretty rough dude. And I remember talking to him about it, and I was thinking, he's really big into this. If he can do it, I should be able to do it. So I started getting into drug and alcohol counseling. That's what opened the door for me. But then in school, I fell in love with psychology and got really into therapy and counseling. So I ended up focusing on social work.
On social work. Now, you said you started with drugs and alcohol, and I'm assuming that it was a very dark place with a lot of people in that type of situation. How did you deal with that personally?
I didn't Right. I didn't care a ton for the drug and alcohol counseling. I think a lot of the people that succeed and do well are recovering addicts. They know that lifestyle well. They're bought into whatever model that they're teaching. For me, thankfully, it wasn't anything I've really struggled with before. I obviously had a lot of empathy for it. I understand it. But what I felt like when I got into that world is, first of all, you only had to do 2 years of school to get into, just initially, to drug and alcohol counseling. So there's a lot of other therapists in that field that didn't have a lot of experience. Most of them were speaking from personal experience, which isn't something we do in the therapy world once you learn more about that. But then the hardest part was just the clients, because most of them were court ordered. No one wanted to be there. And I just never felt like I was making a positive impact. I mean, I felt more like a probation officer, like, oh, how often have you been doing this or that?
Right. Like, just sign me off here. Sign me off here, please.
So that kind of drifted me apart from that world. And then I got into counseling perpetrators of domestic violence. And that's what really, really got me into social work, because I love doing that.
Wow. How hard was it, the switch from all that you've seen in the club world to go into a situation like a social worker would?
Man, a lot of it is human nature. So a lot of that stuff ran pretty parallel. I think with the way I carry myself and my appearance, I kind of put a lot of people at ease when I come in to meet with them. Or I'm not, they know I'm not the judgmental, like, typical therapist. So I think it's been a strength for me in a lot of ways. I primarily work with teenagers on parole probation. So I think that helps a ton. But honestly, I think it was a pretty good transition. The issue was, in Oregon, the issue was, you have to get all sorts of background checks and clearances to work with kids. And because I had a criminal record, I know some of the law enforcement made it difficult for me to find a job in Oregon, but out here in the Midwest, it hasn't been an issue whatsoever.
Rock on, man. So where you said earlier that you hated the thought of going to college, how the hell did you go through? And do you got a bachelor's, or what do you got?
I have a master's degree. I went to school for 8 years and have a master's degree in social work. But yeah, so that first day, I'd been out of school for a few years, and I went to this community college, and I remember sitting down for the psychology class, and I had a spiral notebook and a pen, like the old school days, and everyone's whipping out laptops, and they're talking about PowerPoint presentation, and everything's whizzing by me, and I'm like, no way, I can't. So I just walked. When I decided to go back to school, was 2008, 2009. 2009, I decided to go back to school. Like I said, I was tired of going to jail. And I looked at school as a full-time job. So when I was a kid and I was young, I was like, oh, I'm supposed to go to school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just kind of taking classes. When I went back to school, this is what I'm doing for a living.
It was for a purpose.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I had a focus, and I ended up, I had a 4.0 all through junior college, and then was on the honors list all through undergraduate and then graduate school. So I mean, I did really well because I focused on it. I took it as a career. The things that shifted is, like I said, I was just going to do that 2-year drug and alcohol counseling. Fell in love with psychology. Said, F it, I'm going to get my bachelor's degree. And once I got my bachelor's degree, I said, you know what, I'm a felon with tattoos. I need everything I can go, and it's 2 more years. So I got my master's degree.
How did things change with law enforcement once they seen that you were actually trying to make a positive difference?
Unfortunately, in Oregon, it didn't change much at all. So I had one of my first internships was going to be working for the Youth Authority, the Oregon Youth Authority, and be a counselor for the kids there. And that's the career I wanted. So I was hoping this would be that internship that turned into a job. But unfortunately, they had to do training for it. So I got hired as an intern. They give me the address to this training, and I show up, and it's the State Police Academy. So you can only imagine how long they let me be in that building for before I was recognized and pulled out.
Just go out now. Just turn around.
And they pulled me aside, and I had to have this interview, and they're like, "Hey, we have this information. You're in this club." And I said, "I absolutely am in this club. I owned it." And I said, "Well, I thought it was a strength, right?" But, part of it too is my charges in Oregon were against law enforcement, and you know how that thin blue line brotherhood works. So I think I had that going against me as well. But they actually had said that, they thought my goal was to recruit these young teenagers for my criminal street gang, kids that are not old enough to ride motorcycles or own motorcycles. But, that was they thought I had this grand conspiracy of going to school for 8 years and spending $100,000 to recruit kids from school. So they fired me, and I ended up hiring an attorney and suing them, and I won a discrimination lawsuit against them.
Good.
How hard? You know what? That is something very interesting, and that's a subject on its own.
Mm-hmm.
They make it so hard for a felon to rehabilitate themselves. They actually make it to where they reoffend.
Absolutely. Right. They not only would call places that I was working and say, "Do you know who's working there?" But even when I was getting into martial arts, I went to a Krav Maga school, and a lot of cops train that art. I was there for 1 day, and I was all excited. And the next day I got a call saying that the police union was going to boycott this business if they let me train there.
Wow. Yeah. And how would a felon get around something like that where they don't lose hope?
Well, the positive is I was still able to do it right. And if you're not some high profile guy with charges against cops, you probably have a better chance of doing it. But I would say for me, I just, like I said, I kept my head down and I worked for all the positives. I said, okay, on this side, I've got this criminal record and tattoos, but on this side, I've got this degree and the honor roll, and I'm part of this organization. You know what I mean? You just build the positives in your favor, and, let your accomplishments speak for themselves. Cause eventually that criminal record's gonna be older and older and older. Like my felonies from 1999. So now when I put it on a resume, it's pretty easily explained because it's so long ago.
Man, I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Thanks,
come
bro,
on, let's get over this, Let's get over it.
But yes, I mean, putting that time and space between the charge, but then showing how you've moved forward since the charge is the most important part.
How is your support system during college?
It was great, man. It was great. So like I said, I have a really tight-knit, awesome family. A lot of the brothers were really supportive of me going to school. Like I said, Richie Rich was kind of my mentor, and he had his PhD, so he was very helpful. There's pros and cons to it, right? My initially undergrad, I started at Whittier College in Los Angeles. So which is it's a really good school, but it's like a small liberal arts college. So it's a bunch of 18, 19-year-old kids. And here I'm at 28, 29, whatever I was, 30 when I was there. Everyone had to live on campus, but I didn't because I was too old. So, there was that kind of weirdness, but all the faculty treated me amazing. I got along good. I was in the psychology club. I was the vice president of the psychology club there. Wow. So I just, I made connections and just kept my head down. Like I said, I took it as a job, so it worked out well.
Did this journey start you on to where you were more interested in this part of your life than club life?
Probably not quite yet. But yes, it ended up, once I was really working in the field and really focusing on work and stuff, it wasn't necessarily that I was less interested in club life. By then I'd been doing club stuff for 10, 12 years by now. And I think my priorities were just starting to shift a little bit. Like I said, I was that young kid trying to make a name for myself, and I was all in. And looking back, I was all in for 10 years. And all of a sudden I was like,
All
wow,
in for one thing, one club, you're doing this. And then it's like, all right, now it's like, I got to focus a little bit on
yeah,
me,
I
which
was
you did.
neglecting relationships. I was neglecting a career, and I had to find that balance, and I'd been in long enough that thankfully it wasn't too hard for me to figure out, but I did have to really focus on finding that balance.
Even after something like 12 years or 10 years in the club life, it still can be a terrible time figuring out that balance of club life, home life, friend life. Like,
Absolutely.
it's almost impossible, and so add a whole bunch of schooling in the mix, add all of these things, it's going to be even that much more. So
yeah, it was a challenge, but it also taught me a lot. Just like I said, when I moved to Nevada, it's taught me, when I'm on my own, what can I do for myself? And so it helped me quite a bit.
Did you wish you would have started this journey earlier?
So I think about that often, man. And I think about that with jujitsu as well. Where would I be now if I would have started back in 2000? But honestly, the person I was then and now are two different people. And like I said, when I first went back to school and I didn't have the focus, I blew it off. So I think I found it at the right time in my life when the focus was right. And that's even the same with jujitsu. If I would have tried it after high school, because I grew up wrestling and stuff, I probably would have liked it, but I was all focused on the gang stuff, and then biker stuff, I would have blown it off. So
see, I really think I'm very much like you in this regard, that I will focus on one thing and like try to like conquer it and then move on to the next.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not like I'm doing 6 things at the same time. I'm all in on one thing, try to conquer it, move on.
Absolutely.
That's kind of how I work.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so I was able, I felt like I was at the right point in my life where I could see what was important and have the correct focus for that right period of time. So had I gone to college straight from high school, I don't think I would have been successful.
Right.
What got you into jiu-jitsu?
Well, so I got kicked out of that Krav Maga school and I was looking for some sort of, cause I was working out, I was getting really into like lifting weights and working out. And it's fun, but I was kind of burnt out. I was wanting to find something else. Like I said, I grew up playing all sorts of sports and I was really into wrestling most of my life. So I was trying to find some sort of like fighting art or martial art. I wasn't trying to get into MMA or anything. I'm too old to be getting hit in the face a bunch. But I was wanting to stay in shape, but learn stuff and have some fun. And my buddies kept recommending jiu-jitsu, and because I'm the guy I am, because my friends recommended it, it was like the last of my list. I was like, no, I'm going to try all this other stuff for me first. But then the head jiu-jitsu instructor in Salem ended up, he was from my wrestling team back in high school, so we already had a connection, and I went and tried one class, and I was hooked.
How has jiu-jitsu helped you in your work as a social worker?
What's really, really cool about jiu-jitsu is it humbles anybody. You can go in there thinking you're a big tough guy, and a little scrawny nerdy guy can wad you up and show you're not good at shit. And there's so many different levels to it as far as strength and technique, and respect. Teaches you the respect of the older guys, and listening to your professors and all the stuff that translates to real life, like giving experience to those people who've been doing it longer, hearing input and trying different things. And then I think the biggest part is you're in a lot of bad situations that are terrible, and you think that I'm stuck here. And you have to have that mental talk with yourself of like, hey, 2 more minutes and this round's over. Or if I want to get out of this bad position, I'm the only one that can get myself out of this. That type of stuff is what translates to real life, like being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of discipline,
Absolutely.
that you're teaching yourself or being taught at the same time while you're on the mat, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of internal toughness and discipline for sure.
Yeah.
By the way, we're talking to Mooch. He has a new book out. It's available on Amazon and all the major retailers that sell books. Mike's going to put the link over in the chat room right now. Yeah, he's got it up right now.
And it's there. And also it's in the description of the video. If you guys are watching the playback, just remember it's in the description of both of our videos. And you can check out his Instagram as well below.
What makes you a better social worker than, say, some of your peers?
I think a lot of it is just that real life experience. You can only read so much about different things. And like I said, with the drug and alcohol counseling, because I never had gone through life as an addict, I could empathize with it, but I couldn't always understand all of it.
Right.
And I think a big thing for me, not only of being able to understand the struggle, but to understand how the legal system works, how to understand what it's like, to go against the legal system as a felon, how to get social services, how to get help. Those types of things are things that I physically experienced and went through. And then I feel like because of that, I'm a strong advocate for those that are needing it now.
What would you say to law enforcement that has messed with you and messed with your attempt to go positive with because of something happened in 1999? What would you say to them now? Where
You know,
you
I think it's pretty funny that these anti-gang cops need to really look at themselves and see how much of a gang that they likely are too. If you're holding on, you know, if I'm breaking the law and I get arrested, I have it coming, and that's how life works. But if you're holding on to an old grudge and trying to stop someone from getting gainful employment, essentially, what are you trying to push me into, criminal stuff? Then if you're holding grudges and you're using your power against somebody, I think you might want to look at yourself and see, which one's the real criminal.
Wow. Powerful.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's unfair, the system is really built for you to be stuck and stay inside of it.
Absolutely.
Look at 5 years of federal probation. I mean, there are a lot of people that just smoke normal weed, let's just say, for instance, just not even for medical reasons.
Yep.
And they'll be sent right back to jail, prison, whatever, all because of smoking a little bit. Everything is designed for you to fail in that. And how you can't get housing, can't get employment, you can't get an apartment. Like, where the hell are you supposed to go? Like, how are you supposed to make
it?
And
at that same time, your stipulations are that you have a full-time job, that you have somewhere to live, but no one's helping you do that, Nope. And I think that's where social work really bridges the gap. So we can help those people find those types of things and try and help out where law enforcement and just society in general is lacking.
Is that the idea? Did you get that kind of idea about starting? I think your organization or movement now is Lift, Train, Ride. Is that the kind of thinking that came out of it?
Yeah, you know what? My last few years in the club, I was still in a regional position, so I was kind of overseeing some other chapters, and I was really trying to focus on the positives. I'm sure you guys have heard me say before, but I was always that guy that when I first came around clubs, I was told, hey, you're going to lose everything. If you want to join this club, you're going to lose everything. Your old lady's going to leave you. You're going to get a criminal record. And I remember thinking, how can I call this guy brother and then bring him into something that's going to make him lose everything? So I was always trying to, I got to this point where I'm trying to build some positive. I wanted someone to say, oh, I joined this club and my life got better. Not ever since I joined this club, everything got worse. And so I instituted a rule where it was by vote, but the region instituted a rule where everyone had to work out at least 3 days a week. There was a national rule that everyone had to have a full-time job. And so we were really just kind of pushing like this more positive, like, we were tight knit, but that was the whole point of brotherhood, right? Like what can help each other as brothers. And so when I left the club world behind, I wanted to keep a lot of that stuff. I knew, I wanted to stay away from the politics and the stuff that I didn't like, but I wanted to keep the positive stuff. And so that Live, Try, and Ride came out of that. It was several guys that used to be in clubs and some guys that weren't, but it was the boiled down essentials of what makes motorcycle club fun: riding bikes, going to parties, going on long trips, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, but then the positive focus of, but we're also going to hold you accountable, that everyone has to be working out. If we have an issue, we need to sit down and talk it out right away, just kind of putting that mental health part, to the forefront.
Well, steel sharpens steel, right? And it sounds like that you never deviated from that.
It's kind of funny, I guess, looking back, having a therapist in your chapter, I bet would look funny to any sort of federal wiretap, because you'd sit in there in a room full of alpha males and hear the Sarge go, yeah, but when you said this, it made me feel like this. You know what I mean?
For real.
Which is, it's funny, but it made us all so much tighter, and we got along so much better.
Yep.
We're going to be taking some audience questions now. We've had Mooch on for a while, so we're going to take you guys' questions before we wrap it up. She asked, did Mooch have any problems getting scholarships or student loans as a felon?
Actually, no, I didn't. I got a lot of scholarships, but a lot of them, they were merit based off of how I did in junior college, in community college. But no, there's a box you have to check. And I know if you have like some sort of drug related charges or financial related charges, it could affect you. But my charges have all been violent in nature, so it didn't affect me at all.
Wow. That's good stuff right there. How do you feel about the student loans? Because everybody has to pay them back. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's a catch-22. I understand the mindset of, hey, you use the money, go to school, so you need it. But I also, being a social worker, I'll tell you, we can't even hire people in my field or what I do now without a master's degree. So you're asking someone to spend 100 to 150K in student loans to start out in a career that starts at 30K. So you've got to really like what you're doing, and it's going to be harder and harder to get people in that field if we're holding stuff like that over their head.
Do you think in a country like this that education should be free to its citizens, kind of like a lot of other countries do because of the taxes that we pay?
Absolutely. And I think, there's plenty of money out there for it. And on top of that, what it brings to our culture and our society, right? A more educated society is better for everybody. And then, like I said, to fill those positions, the teachers and the firefighters and social workers, you don't get paid a big living, but you end up spending a lot in education. It doesn't seem like a very fair balance.
It's really good for us as citizens, but it's not good for our government.
Right.
For us to be, up here, up top, having some knowledge, that's what they don't want. That's Absolutely. What I get from all of this. You know what I mean? That they don't want us to be educated.
There's that. And then there's just the monetary value of giving 18-year-olds big loans that they can't ever get out of.
It's a business. It's a dirty business.
We're talking to Mooch right now, the ride of my life, from street gangs to motorcycle clubs to social workers. I think the last question that I would ask you, Mooch, is where is your journey going from here?
Man, that's a good one. I'm just, I'm really hoping, I didn't put this book out to try and get rich by any means. I really just hoping to get my story out there enough to maybe open some other doors, make some other connections, and just kind of see where life takes me. I answer everybody on social media. I've got this book out where I think has a positive message. And my goal is to help, kind of guide others that may be lost or need help. People that were in the same position as me, and just see how I can help other people. So honestly, as long as I could stay active and talk to people and help others, that's where I plan on being.
You're not moving your acting career up?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You hoping that they turn the book into a movie, man?
I mean, that would be cool, right? I think that's everyone's goal when you write a book, but
yeah, right. Netflix documentary next,
Yeah.
That would be
anything
awesome.
That brings my story to the forefront, if it can help others, man, that's my goal.
Good
that's
deal.
Right.
Well, we appreciate having Mooch on the show again. It is the ride of my life. It's from street gangs to motorcycle clubs to social workers, and it is available on Amazon or any online book retailer. Is it in Kindle right now? And I know you're working on an audio portion.
Yeah, it is in Kindle, Barnes & Noble, any of those online retailers. There is the ebook version through Kindle, and then we're working on the audio version right now. But as we kind of talked about, it's a little bit of a journey there, so it might be a little bit before the audiobook's out.
Right, rock on.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate having you on, Mooch. It was a killer one. I really enjoyed the conversation about your struggle to get where you're at right now against all odds with these law enforcements, the government and stuff. And what I really got out of it was don't let them keep you down and just keep on moving forward.
Right.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, thank you, Mooch, for real.
We'll talk to you later, Mooch. Great show, Mikey. You learned a lot here with a guy like Mooch.
That's why I love sitting here. And you ask a lot, Hollywood, like, hey, why are you sitting back, listening so much? Why are you not asking? Listen, man, I love sitting here and being a sponge and being able to soak in all of the knowledge that a lot of you guys have. I mean, that's how I get my knowledge too, is by listening to you guys. And it's an honor for me to be on the show even, so much love.
Rock on, man. Well, everybody, we'll talk to you later. Don't forget Motorcycle Madhouse in the morning. We'll catch you all later. Rock on, baby. You know what? I got to find us an ending, man. I got to find us an ending. We'll
make a new one.
You already screwed up the beginning.
No, you